I don't think you're the skunk of the party. I think we're all very realistic that it was Western aid, United Nations aid in large part, that helped build the tunnels, that helped enable Hamas to do what it did and to plan with absolute precision the events of October 7 2 years ago. So I think we have to be absolutely alive to all of that. We've been down this path, Greg, many times before, but what's different this time against the previous episodes of wars in the Middle East involving Israel, of course, is the world, the Western world in particular, has stood with Israel. This time it's torn apart our suburban streets and our CBDs and our university campuses, and it's seen the return of anti-Semitism to Australia, to Britain, to the United States in a way that many of us could not even fathom 2 or 3 years ago. So I guess that's the challenge, is not just for Israel's sake and the world's sake to make this a lasting peace, but for Australia's sake, to be honest. And how do we make that happen? How do we ensure that the money goes to the people that need it on the ground, that it's not used for terrorism again? And how are we so confident, or can we be confident, that the regime that will run Gaza, forget your committee because that'll come and go, that the regime that runs Gaza is not going to be Hamas by another name?
Well, Peter, I think you're asking absolutely the right questions. So there's a balance sheet here. The good guys have achieved a lot. The regional dynamics have changed, as Peter Jennings pointed out. Iran, Hezbollah and Syria are largely now eliminated as threats to Israel, although Iran is quickly trying to replenish its stocks and is going down the nuclear road again. And the Gulf Arabs have been a bit terrified by what they've unleashed, or what Qatar has helped unleash by backing Hamas historically. And so under a combination of Trump's connection and that Israeli strike into Qatar and so on, they've actually got a bit closer to Israel. So that's a great thing. So the regional dynamics have changed, and Hamas has been dealt a tremendous military defeat. So those are things you can put in the positive ledger. But what can you put in the negative ledger? Hamas has succeeded in a number of its strategic objectives in this terrible war. It breaks my heart to say that. I bleed to say it, but it's true. First of all, they stopped Saudi Arabia and Israel from establishing diplomatic relations. That was just about to occur before the October 7 terrorist atrocities. They've derailed that probably for quite a long time. Second of all, they have, as you rightly observed, Peter, through their actions, they have provoked the greatest and most disgusting wave of anti-Semitism we have seen in decades and decades. And the only Western nation which has really stood absolutely foursquare with Israel has been Donald Trump, the Trump administration in the United States. Australia has behaved with a combination of fatuousness, incompetence and betrayal in all this. The Muslim populations in Western nations have changed the internal dynamics in the outlook of governments towards Israel. And from Hamas's point of view, they don't care that the Palestinian people have suffered 2 years of terrible destruction, because it has really hurt Israel. And it's hurt Israel in a way that previous operations haven't, because it's had to be so sustained. And then the third thing that they've achieved is Gaza is once more back in the centre of global news. And everybody is going to have to stump up money. The Gulf Arabs and the poor old Australian taxpayer and everybody else is going to have to stump up money to rebuild Gaza. Now, will Hamas steal some of that aid to rebuild weapons? Almost certainly. And if it's not Hamas, it might be Palestinian Islamic Jihad or one of the other little terror splinter groups. I think eventually the Israelis want to be rid of the Palestinians. They want a Palestinian state, but that can only happen now after decades of normalisation. You're going to have Palestinian administrations which can police their own extremists, guarantee Israel's security and run a normal society. And Israel tries to do this again and again and again. And the likes of Anthony Albanese and Penny Wong constantly paint Israel as the obstacle to peace. But there was a ceasefire before October 7. Israel was allowing Qatar to give billions of dollars a year in aid to Gaza. Israel was allowing thousands of Gazans to come and work in Israel proper. Israel wanted nothing more than the establishment of a bourgeois life in Gaza and the West Bank in order to normalise the situation. Now, today is a very optimistic day and we've got new dynamics in the region. But to get past a situation where Hamas or its successor doesn't steal the aid again, doesn't regroup, and in 2 years doesn't start firing rockets again at Israel, that's going to be very, very challenging.
Greg, I'm going to bring in Tony Abbott in a moment, but just before I do, and this is off the topic of the Middle East, but just quickly, in the United Kingdom, there's been the abandonment of the investigation into allegations of senior political staff connected to the Prime Minister of Britain and in and around the government bureaucracy involved in, it's said, spying for Beijing. Now, the allegation or the information out today was that they were not able to provide that information to authorities. They weren't able to say whether they thought that China was a strategic challenge to the United Kingdom. And so they've walked away from the politics there, the politics of the investigation, obviously. What's your thoughts on this? Because this is a concerning development, and reports are today that the Trump administration has raised this with 10 Downing Street.
Well, this is an absolute debacle on the part of the Brits. You know, The Economist magazine described the Starmer government last week as just being completely aimless. It is an aimless government. And this is a shocking breakdown in basic security. One interpretation, which is being widely put in the British media, is that the British government is so much on its knees economically and everything that it simply didn't want to offend China by designating it as a strategic challenge or a strategic enemy. Now, if espionage legislation is so loose that you've got to designate someone formally as an enemy before you can prosecute allegations of spying for them, then the Brits need to smarten up their legislation, quick smart. But this has the stench of British weakness, being unwilling to offend Beijing, of the Starmer government just being all over the shop at sixes and sevens. Dear God, they've got years of their term to run. They've got a massive parliamentary majority and they look like they're hanging on by their fingernails. And this, this has to be seen also in the light of their moves against Israel. They've surrendered in large measure to the extremists on their streets, not totally, but in substantial measure. And now they can't even prosecute an espionage case which involves China because that's too sensitive. This is a very poor look for the Brits.
I'll leave it there. Thank you very much, Greg Sheridan.